In the dark forest lies a secret, told in broken stories by those who have bore witness. A monster, a murder, a long-forgotten ghost town. We're here to walk the haunted paths, to seek out the restless spirits who linger in these forsaken places, and we want you to come along. Welcome to Tales, Trails, and Taverns. We're here to take an active approach to finding places that people might warn you not to go to. Haunted trails, abandoned towns, old taverns where you might catch a glimpse of the long-deceased patron. So lace up your boots, grab a working flashlight, and join us as we tell the tales, hike the trails, and grab a cold pint at the local tavern. Right, guys, welcome back to another episode of Tales, Trails, and Taverns. Today I've got a couple weeks ago, actually, I put out a post saying that I was hoping for somebody who knew some Irish folklore, from Ireland, casters, authors, etc. And today I have Bryan Farrell on from, I don't remember the county. Sorry, you just told me and I completely forgot.
No, Joe, you got a lot going on. County Waterford, okay,
yeah.
Ireland. And he reached out to me, said he was looking to come on, said he's a big fan of the show. So, Bryan, welcome. Thanks for coming on, man. Thanks for having me, Joe. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, awesome. So since I got you on here, if you want to talk first, you want to tell us, I know you're an author, you got a couple books out there. How to Contact the Living is one of them, and the other one I don't remember the name of, but if you want to tell us a little bit about that before we get into the rest of it.
Yeah, sure. Look, like as Joe said, I'm an Irish author of fiction. It's mostly horror or kind of horror adjacent spooky stuff. I've got the paranormal thriller How to Contact the Living, which is out. I've also got a horror novella called Maw that is doing the rounds, and later this year there'll be 13 stories, which will be a collection coming out. But look, that's me, and just have, again, lifelong lover of all things supernatural and creepy, whether it's, paranormal related, dark history, myths, folklore, grew up in County Waterford, lived a few places around Ireland like Killarney and County Clare, where there's a lot of, over the west coast, where even like the folklore and the myth is really like almost to the surface a little bit more, like the connection there can be very strong, and also spent like 13 years living in Australia before moving back to Ireland in 2020 with my Aussie wife. So been around a small bit.
Australia, huh? That's pretty cool. I moved down south to North Carolina for like 10 years from New England, where I'm from. Australia's way down south, man.
Australia's way down south. No, it's great. I love Australia. And actually, my wife and I met in like a little outback town where we were both working, and like the town has an official population of 12. And we just happened to be there at the same time. So kind of a kismet destiny type of thing in the middle of the desert. So no, it was good.
Yeah. So your book, How to Contact the Living, that's extremely, that's interesting. That's an interesting title. Is that from like a paranormal point of view? Is that like a spirit's point of view trying to get in touch with the living? Or I don't want you to I don't want you to spoil it, but I want you to.
No spoilers. Joe, you got it in one. That's exactly it. So like basically, look, I don't want to spend the whole show doing an infomercial for my book.
Yeah.
But basically, that's the premise of the book. Is you've got a guy, Will, who is an amateur paranormal investigator, and you've also got the spirit of a deceased cop, Owen, who is trying to get in touch with Will because basically he's trying to solve the last case, the one that killed him, which is trying to stop a serial killer. And it's just about, also, I guess the title has a double play because Will is also like a really insular, introverted kind of dude. So it's the ghost is trying to get in contact with the living, but also Will needs to learn how to interact and contact the living. So and actually, Joe, you mentioned something in the episodes you were doing on your homestead, like the Baker homestead, like your original home house. You actually said something really interesting you said plenty of interesting stuff, but one of the episodes, the lead in, can't remember which part it was, but you said, it's not just about investigating ghosts, it's about listening to them. And like that was really like, that's my attitude, and that's kind of the attitude of the book. Like I love all the gadgets and the ghost busting stuff and all the rest, but like sometimes you just have to like shut up and listen, just the same way you do the way we have to do with each other. I think it goes for the ghosts, if they're out there, you got to be.
Yeah. That's interesting. So I know you said you were catching up with the podcast. There's a couple episodes later on where last October, we actually went back to the home. I went to the homestead and I brought a paranormal investigator friend of mine, and she brought her all equipment and her sons, and we actually spent a night down there in the house, like trying to contact or
trying to see if anything happened, if we could contact something. And she had some different stuff that she felt, some of the stuff that was going on there. And it was pretty interesting. It was a point, like, I went there early before she showed up, and I was going through the house, and I was trying to find my great-great-grandmother's the trunk. I was trying to find the trunk, and at one point I opened up the attic, and the attic was full of stuff, and I'm like in there, and I'm moving stuff around trying to get, because there's like several trunks in the attic, right? They're buried in different depths. And I'm trying to move stuff to get to the next one, try to figure out which one is hers. And as I'm in there, I like move something, and I just feel like the shiver up my spine. And I'm standing up there at the top of the stairs, and I'm like, I'm not trying to steal it. Like, I'm not trying to take your stuff. Just please, I'm trying to find your things. You know what I mean? I'm trying to make sure someone saves it.
Yeah.
Not doing anything bad in here, but
intentions.
but I could feel like a lot of pressure, like a lot of, the spine tingling thing. And I was like,
man,
perhaps something's here watching me. So that was super interesting. You'll get to that. You'll get to those episodes eventually.
Sure.
Yeah. So I brought you on here because I wanted to talk about Irish folklore, because the day after this episode comes out is going to be St. Patrick's Day, which is a huge celebration here. I go down to, there's Newport, Rhode Island has a St. Patrick's Day. Oh my God, it's St. Patrick's Day parade.
Mm-hmm.
It's the Saturday after St. Patrick's Day, so I always go down there for that. Definitely to go out and grab a tall glass of Guinness at some point.
Yeah,
or
gotta be done
more than one time in the next few weeks. But so that's why I brought you on here, and I know you know a lot about St. Patrick. You know a lot about the Irish folklore around that. So can we talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. And look, like, again, like, there's probably people out there who devote their entire lives to studying St. Patrick, or like at least that era of Christianity and stuff. So I don't pretend to be like a scholar, but excuse me, but yeah, I guess growing up in Ireland, it's always been a big deal for us. And I guess, even from a modern standpoint, like, look, like, you've got you in Rhode Island, you've got people in Australia, you've got people in Africa who are celebrating St. Patrick. So for us, it's kind of like, it's really good PR for Ireland that, it's out there doing the rounds. And obviously you've got, like, again, like, say in the States, you've got such a huge population of either like first generation Irish immigrants or people who are 10 generation deep Irish immigrants, and it's a big thing. Like, it's a big kind of connection, I guess, that you get to put the green on and just kind of talk a little bit about your heritage and that kind of stuff. So yeah, look, so St. Patrick, I might be telling people some stuff they know already, but like, one thing that I find some people don't like, St. Patrick was not Irish. So St. Patrick would have been like British. He would have been kind of Roman British. So he would have been from like Great Britain. And that was like, he's 5th century. So again, he'd be British, maybe slightly Roman. It would have been the end of the Roman Empire in Britain. And he was like a pretty well-to-do kid. And he was basically kidnapped by Irish pirates, taken away from Britain, brought over to Ireland as a slave, and forced to work as like a shepherd, basically. So they gave him to some farmer, sold him to some farmer, and he was left out on the side of a mountain tending his flock, kind of before he had an actual, religious flock. And I think he is meant to have spent 6 years in Ireland. So basically he was here for 6 years as a slave, finally managed to escape. It's a pretty cool story. Like, he kind of was spirited away in the night. He traveled throughout the country, had to be in disguise, managed to get on a boat that would take him back home again. But once he got back home, he basically had like I guess you say like an epiphany, like a moment of, God kind of clarity, and decided to become a Christian, but also like a cleric, and actually ended up then returning to Ireland as a missionary. So even though he was here as a slave, he had developed some kind of love for the country and the people and wanted to bring the word of God back over here. So he came back over as a missionary and ended up being a bishop, eventually anointed as a bishop, converted a lot of the island. Like, there was some other missionaries and clerics doing stuff over here at the same time, but he would be kind of the guy that people say that's who made Ireland a Christian country. And yeah, so he's our patron saint. We have 2 other patron saints, Jude and Columba, but St. Patrick is our top tier main patron saint. Joe, as you just said, every year, 17th of March, which is the supposed day of his death. That's St. Patrick's Day, and that's meant to be celebrating him. And obviously over the years, it's become maybe a bit more of a general celebration of just Ireland and the Irish.
All things Irish over here.
That's it. And even, to be honest, that's a little bit the same here. It's just a fun day, and it's a chance to, look, we're not like Ireland's funny because we were Catholic for so long. Like we're still predominantly Catholic, but we were properly, the church told us what to do type of Catholic. So we're
Yeah.
not really like a real boisterous, rah, rah, rah patriot type of country. Like that's not something we really always had. So you kind of didn't have a day where you're like, let's call this Ireland Day, or let's call this, or this day. So St. Patrick's Day was a chance to kind of just be loud and proud and, wear the green and say, we're Irish. And that's, it's always been a date in the calendar, but I think it's specifically kind of the 17th century on where that really got fortified into being the day it is now. And yeah, look, it's like centuries later and it's still a big day every year.
Yeah. It is, especially in this area. I mean, not too far from here is Boston, and there's obviously a huge,
Sure. Yeah.
a lot of Irish immigrants came to New England, came to Boston area. So there's a ton of them. The town I'm in is mostly Italian immigrants that came here. It's a little bit different, but they still celebrate it all over the place.
Sure. And Joe, you're English Scottish, is that right? That's your
I am,
heritage?
yeah. So mostly English Scottish. There is Irish and French Canadian.
Oh, okay. Oh,
And,
nice mix.
What's interesting is I know my grandmother on my mother's side had Irish roots. She also claimed Cherokee at one point, which my aunt found out later that was not true.
Oh.
It was not true at all.
Oh, that's a shame.
But what's interesting, and I do want to bring this up with the whole Irish thing, is you obviously know about the Lizzie Borden murder back in the 1800s in Fall River.
Yeah, with the axe.
Yeah, with the axe. And last year I found out that my aunt's husband, not related to me by blood at all, is a Borden. And he's actually related. He's like a 7th or 8th cousin of Lizzie Borden, right?
Wow.
And so I found this out by going to his house, and there was a picture up on the wall with a bunch of axes. And one of them said, the kitchen axe, as used by cousin Lizzie. And I was like, oh, okay, what the, seriously? And so I asked him about it. He was like, yeah, we're cousins. We're 7th generation, cousins or something like that. And I asked him flat out, I was like, okay, so what's the family's take on it? Who killed, Borden?
Yeah.
The Borden.
What was his response?
He goes, the Irish maid did it.
Oh.
And I was like,
I don't know how I feel about that.
Okay, so that's interesting. So it's a longer story. Last, I don't remember the date, but it was the date that the murder, it was the date of the murders, and it was like however many years from there. And so I put a post up on it, and I was like, oh, the Lizzie Borden Day, and I had a picture from when the last time I was in front of the house. And so my aunt comments on it. She goes, your grandmother always said that her mom claimed to be cousins with the Irish maid, cousins with Bridget Sullivan. And so, like,
that's crazy.
Wait a minute. Are you telling me that, okay. So I had to check, right? Because, and Bridget Sullivan's, they called her Maggie, but her name was Bridget Sullivan. And so I had to go through, nobody knows anything about Bridget Sullivan. Her past and her, her kid and all that stuff is almost disappeared completely to history. I did find one thing that named her parents. And so I started digging through the genealogy in my family, and I found somebody who matches the name of her father in my family tree pretty close to the year. Whoa. And then had a daughter who would have been about the same age as Bridget, but I haven't found like the concrete proof of connection, but I've gotten that close.
That is pretty close though. That's
so, it's a pretty wild thing to go from the Lizzie, the Borden thing, to being like, oh, you have a family member who was a Borden, and you have a cousin who is a Sullivan, who's like,
and possibly the one who did
possibly
it,
actually related, possibly to related to the actual murderer or whatever.
Jeez,
it was pretty wild. It was a pretty deep rabbit hole I went down with that one.
I would definitely fall down that rabbit hole. I can't think of anything interesting like that's happened in my family. But if it did, I would fall into ancestry.com and never come out again.
Oh my God. I was in there for weeks just digging around. Hopefully one of these days I'll go back and I'll try to get even deeper and see if I can actually make a concrete connection. But I don't know. I probably have to go to Ireland and start going through genealogy records to find that stuff.
That's a plan. Maybe that's what you need to do.
Getting back to St. Patrick, I know one of the things that we talked about, or I wanted to bring up, was a story that I heard about the werewolf village in Ireland. Something about, I think it was somebody went there and then cursed the village to become werewolves or become wolves at night, and then went back years later or generations later and found some of that. There was a story about, if you know it, you're gonna have to
Yeah, for
piece it
sure.
together for me.
Yeah, well, look, I'll tell you what I know, and it might be you might have something extra even that. So, and the interesting thing here is like, so there was a kingdom in Ireland called Ossory, so Ossory. So we used to have lots of different kingdoms, and like that would be different clans and chiefs and things like that. And this is kind of before, so the Normans invaded us in like the 12th century, and that would be when then that's kind of the start of English rule in Ireland and other stuff happening. But prior to that, we're pretty much a Celtic country mixed with Viking. So the Vikings came over. The Vikings came over before that, invaded us, but they just kind of stayed, and they ended up being like more Irish than the Irish themselves. So we had like Viking and Celtic mixed. But there was this kingdom called Ossory, kind of in the middle of the country, around where Kilkenny would be nowadays. And there was a legend going back, even back then. So you're talking like early about werewolves. And actually, the guys who were the kings of Ossory, the person they claimed descent from, who would have been like their first chieftain, was also allegedly the original werewolf. So basically, all the kings of this area were descended from this guy and made them royal, but also meant that allegedly they all would have been carrying the werewolf gene to some degree. Yeah, so it's, and like this was like a big thing. You can read like there are Norse sagas in museums in Scandinavia and Sweden where they're talking about these werewolves in Ireland. So it wasn't just like a little local thing. People like this was like a known thing, but it's interesting. So Ireland, like we actually used to have wolves. Like we don't have wolves anymore, but even up until the 18th century, there were wolves in Ireland. Like you can look at stories from the 18th century of wolves attacking villages and stuff like that. And that's why I don't know if you know, like it does the Irish wolfhound. It's like a huge,
Yes,
shaggy
I've seen
dog.
them.
Yeah, and they're like gentle giants, but they were originally bred to hunt and fight wolves in Ireland. So that
Wow,
was
that makes
yes,
sense.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's so there was meant to be this basically like a clan of werewolves, and then it's a bit like again with a lot of Irish history because you're talking about stuff from like like before things are written down on paper, but eventually this became legend about St. Patrick actually specifically where he had gone. So he's going around Ireland converting everybody to Christianity and getting us away from like we had like our old gods, like old Celtic gods and different things like most native peoples will tend to have. You had a god of this and a god of that. And
Yep.
he is alleged to have gone to Ossory, so this area, and the locals there were so dead set against him and were so like, we're not having this at all. So they all, to kind of mock him, as soon as he tried to start talking and converting them, they all started howling at him like wolves. And
Yep.
and this went on. And basically, so St. Patrick left, he prays to God and he says, like, how can I get these people to listen to me? And it's 50-50. Others say, I hate these people now. Do something to them. You're on my side. So in that version of the legend, God then curses them to become werewolves. So it's this weird mix of like this legend that was always there, and then this mix of St. Patrick being involved in it. So it's really interesting. So it's like if you look at one story, God via St. Patrick cursed them to become werewolves. In another version of the story, that whole area was just rife with werewolves since like the first century. So it's fascinating.
That's funny. I remember the first time I saw an Irish wolfhound, and I was like astonished at how big and shaggy it was.
They're crazy. Like they don't look real.
No, they. I was like, oh my God, it's Chewbacca walking on four legs. It was massive. It was pretty wild.
Yeah, and that's like I said. Now they're like if you ever go up to one, like they look kind of scary, but if you pet an Irish wolfhound, they're just like they're like just teddy bears. But
Yeah.
that was originally the reason they were being bred was for that, and that's so that's and one other thing with the werewolf side of it, not to go down too deep a rabbit hole on this specific one, but we used to have these kind of bands of warriors in Ireland that they call the Fianna. So FIANNA, but basically it would just be like these huge like gangs of roving young men who hadn't settled down yet. They'd like be living in the forest, they'd go hunting, they'd be like having wars with rival villages and stuff. But when they used to do this, they'd be like, you can imagine, like they'd be out living in the woods, they were hunting, they'd be covered in blood, they'd have like furs on them to stay warm, and they were just these wild young guys, and that became referred to as he's gone wolfing. So there's also another, like, I guess you'd say, if you go away from the legend and the myth of it, there's like scholars who would say, no, there was never werewolves. It was just, it got confused with the fact that there's these guys in the woods just doing crazy young guy shit, and they're and they're gone wolfing. So, but look, it's really interesting. And like we have, like in Ireland, in the myths and legends, we've got werewolves, we've got our own vampire, the Abertach. We have vampire, and then you've got like the Banshee and all of that. So it's cool. There's a real like spectrum of supernatural creatures that we get over here.
Yeah, I think a lot of that stuff followed the immigrants and stuff over to New England, because we've got a lot of similar stuff. I mean, there's I don't know if we've ever had banshees per se, like probably that type of legend, but definitely the wolves, definitely the werewolves, definitely the vampires. That's a big one in New England. The little people,
yeah, for sure,
and the fairies and the fae folk and all that stuff. That's big, especially in this area, especially with the Freetown State Forest. And what's interesting is that like the little people, they're Pukwudgies here in New England in the Fall River State Forest, and they were believed to have existed. The Wampanoags knew of them and talked about them. And then you hear about the same similar stories all over the world about a small humanoid creature that roams the woods and does all kinds of crazy stuff.
It's crazy, isn't it? And it's crazy when you look at, like, as you say, like the different accounts, whether it's Native American, Irish, you can even Africa, like some of the similarities in those stories across, like you said, like the little people, or like the people like living in like the woods. Like it's just it's some of the stuff you're like, how is that so similar across cultures? Yeah.
So when did was St. Patrick part of the pushing? I know he's got rid of the snakes, and that they say that's euphemism for the pagans in Ireland. Did they push the wolves out too, or did that come later on?
That came later on? That basically was just that was like, as in, so when the Roman Empire took over Britain, so going way back, like they came over to Ireland, like they went that little bit further and came over to Ireland. They called it Hibernia. So anytime if you hear anything to do with Hibernian or Hibernia to do with Ireland, that's just Latin, that's Roman for Ireland. And they basically stepped off the boat in Ireland. The country was just one huge forest at that point, and they were like,
sounds awesome.
That sounds fantastic. I know, yeah. I'd stay. I'd stay. Idea. But they were just like, oh, it's just one giant forest full of savages and wolves. We're not going to worry about it. So basically, we kind of got lucky. We got invaded by everybody else, but we didn't get the Romans. But then over time, so we were a country that had like a giant stag and wolves and stuff. But it was basically just a byproduct of the country becoming modern. So like, as I said, like there was wolves here up until I think the late 18th century. So pretty like relatively recent, but we've gone from being a country that was covered in woodland to we're now one of the countries in Europe with the least amount of woodland, unfortunately. So there was just basically no room for them. Like people were just hunting them, and like you guys would see it in America. Like once someone wants to build houses somewhere where there's animals, like they're going to take the animals out, which is not great, and people are getting better about it now, but back then it was just not a case of people were wringing their hands about it. They were just like, kill the wolves, build the houses, keep progress going.
Yeah, so there's none on the island at all. There's none on Ireland whatsoever anymore?
None, only there would be, in captivity, like there's a few, like there's a guy up north who's doing kind of this rewilding Wild Ireland park, and I think he would have some wolves in there, but again that would be in captivity or at least closed in. But as far as a native species, they were eradicated, which is unfortunate. It's super. Is there enough woods in that area to try to bring them back? Is there any type of reintroduction of wolves in Ireland, or is you guys too populated now? I think, look, we're kind of underpopulated by European standards, but we are a small island, and I just think you're never going to sell people. Like, I would love it, but I don't. It's a hard sell to sell people on rewilding or repopulating wolves. So I think if they are, I think it'll always be in some level of captivity, even if it's like that guy, and that there's plenty of woods up. He's got this huge estate, like a country estate, so he can have them. But I can't see them ever being actually in Ireland again as a wild species.
Yeah, I hear you. They've been taken out of certain areas in North America, and they try to bring them back in some places. Like North Carolina is trying to bring back the red wolf. I know that started a few years ago, probably almost a decade ago now. And then Connecticut, the last one was killed in the 1700s. I actually found I was hiking one day and I came across a spot where I kept seeing signs for wolf den, and I had no idea what it was.
Yeah.
And then I walk around a corner and there's a sign, and there's a hole in a rock, and it says, "This is where Israel Putnam killed the last wolf in Connecticut in 17 something. I don't remember.
Wow.
He was a 17-year-old boy before the revolution, and he ended up being a general of the revolution. But it was like his big thing. They killed the last female wolf in Connecticut, and it was in his den. So of course I crawled into the den, right? Because
You know what's safe anyway.
it's like, yeah, there's no wolf in there, right? So I crawled inside of it. It was super creepy, but very interesting.
That is interesting.
History, yeah. So the next part, what else we want to talk about? More St. Patrick's stuff. I did ask Adam last week. He's from Dublin originally, and I asked him about leprechauns. I don't know if it's like something you know anything about, or if there's. I'm wondering if there's some sort of origin for that besides just, because when you see leprechauns, you think like Lucky Charms, you think really stupid commercialized shit. No other better way to say it, but
yeah,
I wonder if there's some sort of legends or lore or something in Ireland that kind of that starts from, you know what I mean, before where that comes from.
No, there definitely is. I guess like leprechauns are not a huge thing in Irish folklore. Like you would think, because now they've got such an outsized influence and like iconography almost. Like
right,
said,
and
like,
that's what I just want to know is like, where do they come from? Like, where does that start? Where does the little guy in the green hat with the shamrocks chasing rainbows and looking for his pot of gold? Where the hell does that start from? Like,
I think honestly, it's like, so like, you know how people talk about and say like Coca-Cola are like partially responsible for Santa Claus, like how we view Santa Claus now.
Suit,
yeah, exactly. And like, so with the leprechaun, like there definitely is, the leprechaun does exist in Irish mythology. So it's not just like made up or anything. It's not a huge player in Irish mythology. Like a lot of time, if you look at Irish mythology or folklore to do with the fairies, or you can say, or call them the She, they tend to be in clans and groups and families. So the leprechaun is already unusual because when you say leprechaun, you're normally talking about one leprechaun. You're not talking about like, most of the stories, if you hear about them, it's one guy. So they're meant to be like cranky, solitary. I think the Irish base words for leprechaun basically are like cobbler. So he was meant to kind of be the cobbler, like the shoemaker for the fairies.
Yeah, okay.
So he does exist in Irish folklore, but I think what happens then is, I think like it's late, like maybe 19th century, a couple of writers who were writing about Irish folklore just really caught onto the leprechaun. Like they mightn't even been Irish themselves. They were just like, this sounds great. Like this is what I think of when I think of Ireland. So they start kind of writing about him more. And then you've got like there's the Disney movie I think it's from the 50s, Darby O'Gill and the Little People, which was like a big movie back in the day. It was like, I think it was like Sean Connery's first movie. So it was like, it was pretty big in America and around the world in the 90s. And that was all about leprechauns. So if you saw that in the 90s as a kid, like this is Disney, and you knew nothing about Irish mythology, now you've got this really fun movie about leprechauns. And then of course go forward to like 1990 and you've got Leprechaun, like the horror.
Yes, I was going to bring that out too. That was crazy. That scared the hell out of me as a kid, yeah.
Me too. I remember the first Leprechaun, like my parents were gone on like a little holiday and my grandmother was babysitting us, and I rented Leprechaun on VHS from the local shop, and my grandmother looked at the cover and she was like, "Are you sure your parents would let you watch this?" And I was like, "Yeah, Gran, it's fine. It's just like a kid's movie." And I was traumatized. She went to bed early and I stayed up watching Leprechaun and I was shook. So yeah, so look, it does, like, so leprechauns definitely do exist to a point in Irish folklore, but probably now between like Lucky Charms, the Leprechaun horror movies, and some other stuff, they just have almost an outsized presence worldwide versus how much you actually hear about them in Irish mythology.
That makes sense. So let's talk about the what I also want to talk about was the fairy folk and stuff like that, because that one, it comes up a lot when you're talking about, I like to go hiking. I like to be out in the woods, spend a lot of time doing that. I listen to podcasts that are about being out in the woods and a lot of the paranormal stuff, and they bring up fairies, they bring up the woods folks, all kinds of stuff like that. So let's talk a little about that stuff. Like, do you have things like the fairy rings? I know Adam brought that up, and I know that's a big part of the.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so fairy rings or fairy forts, people call them. There's also like fairy mounds, which are they're old burial mounds, which would be like pre-Christianity, and they're associated with the fairies. Actually, like one of the Irish ways of saying the fairies or the fae folk is Ishi, so the she.
Ishi.
and she is Irish for mound. So you're basically saying the folk of the mounds. So at a point where people would have thought that's where they live, that's their territory.
Yeah.
So yeah, look, no, that all of that stuff, like the fairy folk, definitely growing up in Ireland, like it was always like almost like Santa Claus, where you're like, it's not real, but I'm not saying it's fake. Like,
Right.
it's probably not real, but just don't piss them off. Like, just do, if you're getting rid of salt, throw it over your shoulder.
Yeah.
Don't throw, that kind of stuff. So just like, I guess a superstition, but it's definitely, like, I think I'm probably not the first person to say this. Like, the scholars saying this, but like, mythology and folklore, a lot of it is designed around telling people what to do and not to do in a lot of good ways. Like you said specifically, Joe, like, when you're out in the forest or the woods, like there's so much associated with almost like stories that you can tell were designed to tell someone these mushrooms are poisonous.
Yeah.
These mushrooms are good, but it's hard for people to remember that stuff. Whereas if you put it in story form, or, you make a story about this magical well, where basically the root of the story is someone trying to tell people where the fresh water is. But, if you say, like, go into the woods, take 5 lefts, then go 8 miles north, whereas if you say, you follow this tree, go to the mountain that looks like a giant, go, that's people just retain that, like the same way we retain a movie or a book. So yeah, so the fairy folk, the interesting thing, the one that I like about them is, so we had this clan of gods called the Tua De Danann, who were kind of like our original pantheon of gods. So like the way the Norse would have Thor, Odin, those guys, or the Egyptians would have Osiris, Anubis. We had the Tua De Danann, so that was our like god pantheon. And the fairy folk now are basically meant to be them, but civilization and Christianity and modernization drove them underground. But they kind of like they were top of the pile, they were the gods, and over centuries and millennia, they now exist kind of like in a different form, in the woods, in the forests, just kind of doing their own thing. And the main thing is just to not piss them off, because they're like a lot of the fairy stories you would hear from Ireland, like it's not kind of like the fairy stories you hear from like a kid's book, or, kind of English.
Right. No, it's not. They're
No.
very much like a warning stories. Yeah.
Absolutely. That's it. They're pretty, they're pretty badass. Like when you hear stories about like fairy stories from, say, the UK, from England, they tend to be quite nice. Like, there's fairies at the bottom of the garden and they'll grant you these wishes. Ireland, it's kind of like, we're going to take your firstborn and don't make a song and dance about it. And, you've got, I think even Joe, you mentioned it, like the whole changeling mythology around fairies, where they're basically, myth is they'll
steal a baby and send somebody else in replacement from it, right?
Exactly. That's it. Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's been a lot of people, I know there's been a lot of stories and accounts of people who have, kind of even here in New England, they've murdered their kids and their wives and said, oh, they were changelings and there was something wrong with them. And it's just could just be as simple as a change of behavior.
Absolutely.
But
that's it.
people, the superstition was there. They definitely carried it over. They definitely carried it across the pond.
Yeah, and look, people definitely bring, like you said earlier, like people definitely bring their gods and their stories and their myths and everything with them. I think also it's probably like a comfort if you were especially if you were back in the 17th, 18th century and you're in this like new country. Like that's what you don't know the country. You maybe don't even know the people down the road, but you've still got your stories and your own mythology that kind of keeps you close to home.
Yeah. I just wonder if like the old mythology, when they started coming here, when they started coming to the New World, if the old mythology was as scary or less scary than the stuff that the natives were telling them about the monsters and things and the spirits that existed here for however many thousands of years that they were here. Because some of the stories that come out of Native Americans, because you always hear like when you're doing New England New England legends and stuff like that, you're hearing like you've got what the colonists called things, and then you've got what the natives called things, and sometimes it's like which one's worse, Yeah,
well, even like they've like the Wendigo, if you say it like that's like the Skinwalker, like that is terrifying.
The Banshee Skinwalker, yeah.
Yeah, jeez. Yeah,
thankfully,
I think
that's out west. Thankfully, that's not.
Yeah.
We've got the
so,
Puckwudgies here.
So the Puckwudgies, would that be Rhode Island specifically, or New England in general?
It's New England in
Puckwudgies?
general. It's a
Okay.
Wampanoag. I think it's a Wampanoag thing, and the Wampanoags are mostly in Massachusetts, Cape Cod, Plymouth, Boston, north end of Rhode Island. I don't know if the Narragansetts in Rhode Island had the Pukwudgie mythology. Probably had something similar if they didn't,
Okay,
You
that's
find that
interesting.
in the Freetown State Forest, and that's where the Wampanoags were based out of, I think.
Okay. Oh, that's cool. And I think, like, again, probably back in the day, the settlers were probably not to a certain degree having huge chats with the Native Americans while they were, at war. But it's really interesting now, like you said, to have these different mythologies living side by side and kind of like intertwining, like because you just know, like, it's like anyone, when you're telling a story, like if you're Irish back then and and a Native American tells you this amazing bit of folklore, as soon as you are talking to the next guy, you're gonna be like, listen to this bit of Irish mythology.
Right. Let me tell you about something else here.
And even like in, say, like I was saying, I lived in Australia for a long time, and like they've got the Aboriginals over
Yep.
there, and they've got amazing mythology. Like they've got this whole thing called the Dream Time, which is almost like it's a combination of their religion and their mythology. And again, a lot of it's designed around understanding the landscape and explaining to people different parts of the landscape. So again, to say to the next
Yeah.
generation down, here's where you'll find water, here's where you'll find food, don't go here, don't eat this. But it's also this amazing, like, complex, like it makes the MCU, like, it makes Marvel look like straightforward compared to what, these native cultures have. It's amazing,
Yeah. So, what about, I know we talked, what about the little people? Something, is there something like that? Is there like a little people? I know, not leprechauns, but something else.
Yeah, well, look, essentially, like so if you're talking about fairies in Ireland, so like I said, if you're talking about the fairy folk, the fae, the she, whatever you want to call them, they are the little people, essentially. Like they are like the different
Okay.
names. They've got like a million names. They're like the good folk, the good neighbors, the little people, the little folk. So yeah, look, so when you're talking about little, like in that sense, mythological sense, the little people in Ireland, like you're talking about the fairies, and by extension, you're talking about, as I said, these beings that used to be gods, and basically just over time their territory shrank, and now they have the caves and the woods and the forests, and they're these little guys. So yeah, that is the little people, and again, so much of that is, like even if like Ireland's a pretty small country, but if you are, say, I'm in County Waterford, if you go, up to Dublin, or if you go up north, or go west to Clare, like there's, even within a small country, there's different mythology, there's different, there's different stories, slightly different, like, creatures that are, will be discussed in one area's folklore that won't be in another. So, it is interesting to even talk to someone from the other side of the country, and you'll talk about a certain, say, like, for example, there's this creature in Irish mythology, the Dullahan, which is basically like our headless horseman. So we have a
Okay.
headless horseman in Irish
Yep.
mythology. But if you talk to someone, say from my side of the country, we would talk about the Dullahan, and we would say, yeah, he's headless, but he actually rides a carriage with two black horses that breathe fire. And if you see the Dullahan, he's coming to collect a soul,
Oh,
and
okay.
that of someone who's died. But if you go to the other side of the country, they're like, no, 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 no. The Dullahan is a headless horseman, but he rides a horse, and he comes for the wicked
Yeah.
and chops their heads off. Very like actually Sleepy Hollow kind of stuff. So, but again, so it's this same approximate, like, creature, but two sides of the country just talk about him in different ways.
That's interesting. When I went to Sleepy Hollow a couple of years ago, and I did a whole dive on that story and about Washington Irvine's story, and I didn't realize that there was so much of his story that was pulled from legends in Sleepy Hollow. So it was
Cool.
very interesting to go back and like find that the idea of the headless horseman came from the Hessian soldiers that were essentially mercenaries during the Revolutionary War. They were brought over from the Hessian part of Germany, and one of them had lost a head. There was stories of a headless horseman, not a headless horseman. There was stories of a headless Hessian warrior in that area, which then Washington Irvine turned into the headless horseman mythology.
Wow.
And then there's a place called Raven Rock, and there's some stuff about a wailing woman of Raven Rock. And then there's Captain Andre, who was somebody who was a traitor in the Revolutionary War and was feeding secrets and ended up getting caught and hung in a tree at what is now Patriot Park in Torytown. Super interesting stuff especially when you think something is just a story.
Yeah.
This is what I love doing that. When you think something's just a story and you go and check it out, visit places, and then you start digging into the history and you realize like that story came from other stories, and those stories came from actual true events. It's such an interesting thing. But then, so the fairy folk, right? Have you ever heard the idea that Do you know what the hell is the elf on the shelf? Have you ever heard of that? Is that something in Ireland, or is that
It
just?
is, yeah. I know what the elf on the shelf is. Yeah.
Have you ever heard somebody brought up, and I saw this on social media a while ago, somebody brought up the idea that the elf on a shelf was a fairy or was a fae folk and struck a deal with the author to essentially grant themselves, like, trading money for power, for, for people to worship them. And essentially putting the doll in everyone's house is a way to worship this fairy and a way to worship this particular god. I mean, this godlike creature, and kind of bring its power back up.
I have
You ever
not heard that, but that is amazing.
Right? I mean, that kind of makes sense. Like,
It makes
when you talk
perfect
about
sense.
what the fairies want and what they need belief, essentially, right? They
Yeah,
want to be
belief,
let into your
worship.
home.
Yeah. Um, and the elf on the shelf is pretty sinister, I have to say. Like, we do not have one in my household, but like anytime, like, it is creepy. Like, any small
Yeah.
autonomous humanoid thing that's moving around your house.
I already don't trust dolls. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I already don't want, and I have a couple, like, you see behind me, I got a couple things here, but
Yeah.
like, I already don't, trust dolls. I didn't want, my ex-wife told me she got an elf on the shelf for her son. She was like, oh, he's going to bring it over to your house. I'm like, the hell he is. I'm not inviting that thing in my house.
You're like doing a salt circle outside the house. They're like, no.
Putting up protection,
Yeah.
cast some spells out there. Keep that thing out, man. Forget that.
But no, I love that theory. I have not come across that before. So it actually makes perfect sense.
Yeah, I think that was somebody who does that for a living, like looks into mythology and stuff like that, came up with that theory and like
Nice.
put it out there. I thought it was super funny.
Very funny.
Is there any mythology as far as like the fairies go? Is there, like, do you ever hear about people walking through Fey gates and like going into the fairy realm or anything like that, like getting lost in different portals in reality?
Yeah, for sure. Like, not, I don't have any direct story for myself, but look, it is definitely something here. People just go through, like, you're meant to basically, like, the whole thing is you're just meant to leave them the fuck alone. Like, you don't go into their territory. So we have, as you said, and I think Adam said, like, we have fairy forts over here, which are basically like they're the ruins of old dwellings that the earth has grown up over time. So they form these like ring impressions. And you've also got like, so there's certain trees and plants over here that are considered the fairies' domain. So like hawthorn, like a hawthorn tree, which we also call whitethorn, that's meant to be like the fairies' kind of sacred symbol. So like a big thing over here is if someone is developing land, like say they're laying down a road or they're trying to build houses, if there's a hawthorn there, you're not meant to touch it. Like, there has been huge things over here. Like, there was even in the early 2000s, there was a big road going in the west of Ireland, and there was a hawthorn tree exactly where the road needed to go, and no one would touch it. So the guy, the
Wow.
like multi-millionaire developer was like, someone get in there, get the bulldozer, and everybody
Yeah.
was like, not me.
Nope.
Not me. And eventually that guy did get his way. I don't know, he got someone to do it. And interestingly enough, a couple of years later, he went bankrupt, and he was a multi-millionaire real estate developer, went bankrupt. You have another example, like, yeah, no, for sure. And again, late 90s, another instance of that happened where there was a hawthorn tree or hawthorn hedge even, so a few of them, where someone wanted to build property development. And there's basically a lot of townspeople and people who were into the heritage stuff got together and protested, and they eventually got it changed so that the tree wasn't touched. So even though still like we're a modern country, like there's still this stuff that resonates down through. And as I say, like you definitely hear about stories about people being out at night.
Yeah.
They're trying to cut through the woods, trying to cut through a field. The next thing they know, they're in a fairy fort, and then it's just fair game for the fairies to just absolutely mess with them.
That's so funny. I always look for weird stuff in the woods when I go out there and walk around. I don't find too much weird stuff. Well, I say I do when I don't. I don't find fairy gates is what I don't find. It was there was at one point I went out looking for the grave of a supposed witch, right? So I was out in this patch of forest, and there's this big chunk of haunted woods not too far from here in Connecticut. And I went on the trail to find this place, and the old legend was that there was a witch in the area. The truth is that the old grave was for a 2-year-old girl who died of, I can't remember what disease, but it was something very treatable today, right? And then she was buried close to the house, so it was close to the old foundations. found the foundations, found the grave. And then as I was walking back, at one point, I see this little path that goes off in the woods, and I'm just like, I'm drawn to this little path. It's not a path. It's just one little open spot, and I'm drawn to it. And I walk in there, and like 10, 15 feet in the woods, I turn, and there's these two huge pine trees, and they just make what looks like a gate, like a castle gate almost. These two massive trees, and then just inside of it, there's this little clearing. And there's this big stone right in the middle of the clearing, and it's got a flat spot right in the front of it. So I walk through these two trees stupidly. This is what I do. I walk through these two trees, I walk into this stone, and it's got this big flat spot right in the front of it. And I wipe all the pine needles off it. I'm like, oh my God, it's like a chair. I was like,
Whoa.
so I'm sitting in it, right? So like,
that's the natural progression of this story.
That's exactly how the story goes. I sit in it. A couple of videos, it was beautiful. It was super awesome. Nothing weird happened, but I was just like, I don't know why. This is what I do. I find stuff and I just tempt fate in the woods.
Tempt fate. That's tempting fate in the woods. But that's it. You know, it's amazing, isn't it? Like you almost now need to go out into the woods, or hiking, or up the side of a mountain to really like. Well, one, it's just amazing to do anyway, and it's just being that close to nature. But it is also when you see this stuff that it's just,
and it's not anything super. It's not a big hike. It's not a big climb. It's not a big view. It's just cool, neat stuff that you find.
Yeah, and I think because when you're doing that stuff, if you're hiking or just walking or in the woods, you're set to like you've already slowed your pace. You're not driving in your car. You're not on a computer. You're in the woods. You're kind of tuned in, and you see stuff that if the same thing was on the street as you're walking from work to the store, you probably go past it and not even see it. You'd be checking your phone to like, oh man, I'm late for this or that. But when you're just out in nature, this is the stuff it's almost like nature rewards you, or the little folk reward you and go, come over here, look at this.
Yeah, that's super funny. It reminds me of another time I was out in the woods, same patch of woods, a little further up. I think I walked along, and I was just sort of doing the same thing, just looking for stuff. And I look over in the woods, and there's a leaf in the woods just off the trail going like this, just no wind or anything, and nothing else is moving. There's one that's just going like this, and I was like, okay, I pull my phone out. I swear to you, man, I pulled my phone out, hit record, it stops.
Always the way.
I'm like, okay, like seriously right now. So I put my phone away. I take a couple steps, turn around, look back. It's waving again.
No.
Like, nope, I'll leave it. That was one of those ones I felt like, I gotta go.
You don't have to warn me twice. I'm going.
Right. Yep. I'll leave. Thank you.
Yeah.
That was fun.
We had near where I grew up, as I was saying earlier, like there's not as much woodland left in Ireland as there used to be, and a lot of woodlands we have now are stuff that was planted like in the 18th, 19th century.
Yeah.
But near where I grew up, there's actually ancient woodland, so it's proper ancient woods. Like it's there before, who can say, it's just there forever, time immemorial. And like we used to go in there as kids, and like I would just spend an entire Sunday as a kid just going around those woods. And like there was old people used to live in those woods way back in the day, so there's old houses in there in the middle of the woods and other stuff. But like there is an abbey, like a big church, so it's nuns live there near the woods. There is a white lady ghost story that goes with that abbey. Then you've got the ancient woods next to it. There's a lot of stuff in those woods. Like there's times I was in those woods and I just felt so at peace and so nice. And then there'd be the odd time I'd be in those woods and just, it was like the woods were angry. You just had this feeling like I'm not meant to be here today.
Yeah.
Like you just back out slowly. And even when me and my sister were kids, we found this, like, it's probably the only personal direct interaction I've ever potentially had with like the fae or the fairy folk. Near those woods, we found this tiny little like structure. I don't want to say house because that sounds like I'm building it up, but a tiny little structure made out of twigs. And it was just like, you're talking like a dollhouse size. And it was made out of twigs, and it was definitely constructed. It wasn't something nature could make. And like, it wasn't really an area where there'd be kids or someone to do this. And we were just like, and I mean, I was so young, this is terrible. Like, I can't remember what age I was. Like, I basically kicked it. like because I'm an idiot I'm an idiot now, but I was more of an idiot as a kid. And like to this day, like sometimes my sister and me will just be sitting talking with someone else, and she's like, "Remember that fairy house that you demolished?" And like I've had a good life. Like I would consider myself a lucky person. So I'm hoping that whatever fairy's house that was, they just were not there to see who did it at the time.
Somebody
Yeah.
else came by, they caught them.
Yeah, that's right, walking past. But again, like the same, like just in those woods, like I went back to those woods a couple of years ago for the first time in a long time and walked through them, and like there's little streams in there, and just there's just places in there where you just feel like if you believe in magic at all, that's where it'll be. Like that's where you
Yeah.
feel something otherworldly.
Yeah. There's definitely been some times when I get into a patch of woods and I'm like, oh my God, it's Fern Gully. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
you remember that movie?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Like, oh, it's Fern Gully. It's so beautiful. Everything's green. Everything's lush.
Yeah.
Little
It's
stream running through it, stuff like that. Yeah.
it's amazing when you get those experiences, and like you said, you're just looking around. You almost wish, sometimes like it's great if you got someone with you, because you can
Yep.
kind of elbow them and go, man, look at this. But when you're just by yourself, it's more special in one way, but you're also like, you're like, oh man, I wish I had someone to show this to.
Yeah. Even if you take video and stuff like that, you like, it never comes through. It never
No, it
shows the way it looks.
No, and especially like if you're in the woods, say like and the sun is doing that like dapple effect, which
Man,
looks
yeah.
amazing in real life, but your phone's just like skitzing out
Barely picking
between
it
the
up.
light and the dark, and exactly. Like you come home, then you're showing something like, well, that's a really nice gray blur that you enjoyed for yourself.
That's funny. So, yeah, we're nearing the end, but do you have? I've talked to a couple people who live in the UK and Ireland, and they tell me that the pubs over there are some of them are super old. They talk to me about, a wall in a pub being like 900 years old and being original. You got anything like that? You got any super old pubs in your part of the country?
Yeah, look, we haven't down here. Like it's funny, like so even say like so I'm in County Waterford, so kind of like say countryside, but we've Waterford City, which is the oldest city in Ireland. So Waterford City was actually founded by Vikings. Like
That's awesome.
so like the ford in Waterford comes from fjord, like how you'd say like fjord, so and like in Waterford City there's like it's a 6th or 7th, someone's going to hear me on this now and say I said the wrong century, but there's basically a tower that was built by Vikings in the middle of the city. Like they never knocked it down, it just has always been there. So it's this huge tower in the middle of the city, and there's a pub next to that called the Reginald, and they reckon there's been a pub on that site for a millennia. Like for like, obviously not that pub, but there's been a pub there on those grounds. And like the same thing, like you go up to Dublin, because Dublin was also a Viking city. And the same thing, like there's pubs in Dublin that are 800, 900 years old. And like you said, Joe, like you walk in and like the front looks probably like a lot of times the front just looks like a normal pub, like sometimes even like a newish pub, and then you go in and there's like a random wall at the back that they haven't painted, and there's just like a small plaque going like, this wall is 850 years old, please do not lean against it.
That's so awesome.
Yeah, and the other thing in Ireland is a lot of the pubs over here used to also be funeral homes. So before refrigeration, a lot of the pubs in the country would have had basements, like cellars where you keep the drinks. And of course, what's the other thing that you need to refrigerate in a small town back in the day? So a lot of the pubs in Ireland would have doubled up as the guys would have been like the publican, like the landlord, and he would have been the undertaker. So like even I used to work in a pub in County Clare near the Cliffs of Moher, and that had a huge cellar. Like you wouldn't, if you walk into the pub, just looks normal. You go down to the cellar, which is only accessible to like staff. We used to have the kegs down there, and it was the entire size of the building plus a little bit more underground. And that used to be where they'd have the bodies and the coffins, and you just be in there like changing a keg, and you just be kind of looking over your shoulder, getting these weird feelings. Yeah, there is a lot of history in pubs in Ireland, and I guess also just because not to be stereotypical about it, but we were and are to a degree a drinking culture, and so the pub was where people met. It was like the pub was like the community hall, the confessional to a degree. The pub was just just everything really. So yeah, the history, like some of these pubs, you'll just walk into, Joe, if you get over here doing your research at any stage, like just you'll just walk into a pub and you'll start looking at things, and then you'll see something all like, yeah, there's been a pub here since 1600 and this, but prior to that this was a monastery. Like there's always some weird wacky history to pubs over here.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think we need to bring back the whole, like, the public part of pubs where we talk, especially politics. We need to bring more politicians and stuff into pubs and do more community events
Absolutely
in pubs. Because that was definitely here in New England too. It used to be more of a community thing, and there was a lot more stuff that happened in pubs than they do now.
Yeah, even when we were kids, like I remember just being like, you'd be like my family wouldn't have been big drinkers, but like even when we were kids, if you went on like holidays, and I say holidays, 5 miles over to the next village that was near the sea, and we had like a caravan or a trailer or something, like the adults would go to the pub, you'd go with them, you'd sit there with like your soft drink, like your Coke or whatever, and a packet of peanuts, and you just watch all this like crazy stuff happen around you, and again, you were just like, oh, I can't wait to be an adult, this looks amazing.
Yeah, right. That's awesome. Yeah, that's some incredible stuff when you can talk about pubs that are that old. I mean, we've got the oldest tavern in America we have it here in Rhode Island, goes back to the 1700s, and that's
still pretty freaking old though. Like it
is old. Yeah,
jeez,
it's definitely not new,
but that's, yeah, and look, it's just, and even I saw it in Australia, because Australia's, as a, I guess like you'd say, like a white Western country, it's newer again than the States, and the same thing, but they're slowly, same thing. Like now you go in somewhere and there's something from the 18th century or like the late 17th century, and again, it's just going to be 500 years from now, and people are like, man, that is old as shit. So and it's and look at America, because like we have like Halloween comes from Ireland, like that comes from Samhain, which like people sometimes will say is Samhain because it's kind of spelled Samhain, but it's pronounced Samhain, doesn't really matter, but like that's where Halloween comes from.
Yep.
Like Halloween went to the States, again talking about, people bringing that stuff with them, and you guys absolutely improved it in so many ways. Like, as in, we didn't, like, I think we used to carve turnips, and you guys were the ones that like had the pumpkins. Trick or treating was a kind of a thing over it, but like, as in, so even as an Irish kid growing up, like we were always very proud of the fact that Halloween came from Ireland. But you'd be watching like Hocus Pocus or American movies going, man, they are doing Halloween right over there. So you're also, I guess you guys are already over centuries building up your own folklore mythology of where it started. So it's really interesting.
All right, well, I think we're gonna wrap it up. I think we're a little far in. You want to tell us, everybody, just before we go, where we can find your stuff, where we can find your books, website, all that stuff?
Yeah, sure. So I'm pretty active on Instagram, paranormal_punk. I put book updates on there. Sometimes I just put like a movie review or a book review if I'm enjoying something. The website is bryanfarrellauthor.com, Bryan with a Y. And you can, my books are on, everywhere. Like they're on Amazon, but if you cannot give money to Amazon, they're in other lots of good places as well. So on my website, I try and keep a list of independent bookstores and websites where they're available as well.
Awesome. Well, Bryan, thank you so much for coming on here and talking about the Irish folklore and the wolves and St. Patrick's and all that stuff, man. It was awesome.
Thanks for having me, Joe. No, it was great. Look, it was really fun.